Season 5, Episode 8, Smooth Criminal, the Sociology of Industrial Crime. In this episode, Alan broaches the topic of industrial manslaughter. Trajce reflects on a case where a prosecuted employer ritualistically honoured the anniversary of the death of the worker by paying for an ode of remembrance in the bereavement section of the local newspaper to acknowledge how much the apprentice was missed. It fascinates me because of the sociology of crime, the industrial criminal who commits crimes unintentionally, he says. The optimism in Sarah dreams of a better world where desired behaviours are rewarded to balance the punishment that authorities dole out.
Educate your mind, cause the system will keep you blind. Educate your mind, cause the system will keep you blind. Educate your mind, cause the system will keep you blind. Create a new path, don't let the people follow your signs. Educate your mind.
Hello, and welcome to the Why Work podcast, a series of playful legal dissections on the most curious and alarming events in the world of work. The podcasters Alan Girl, Trajce, and Sarah Pazell debate how to craft a better experience of work. Sit back, relax, and enjoy. And remember, none of the things we talk about today should be construed as legal advice or any other type of advice. We're just here to talk about all things related to work.
Okay, Trajce, I want to tell you about a case that's just come out in the last week, or a decision that's just come out in the last week, at least at the time we're recording, and it's got a bit of everything in it, this case. Very interesting. It's a Victorian case, and according to WorkSafe Victoria, it's the very first company and individual charged with workplace manslaughter. So it's a first for Victoria, and it's a tragic case in many respects. What happened was it was a stonemasonry business. We've got a company and a business owner. I'm not sure from the material I've got what exactly the words business owner means. That might mean he's the sole director of it. And he was operating a forklift. He was moving around some stands for stone. So if you know stonemasonry businesses, they often have sheets of stone that they stand vertically, and they have special designed stands so that the stone leans back on the stand, so it's not going to topple off. So he was moving one of those with a forklift, and whilst he was moving it, a young man, Michael, moved in close. He was trying to steady the load when it started to tip over, and so it's the stand, not stone, and it tipped over and crushed him, killing him. Now at the time, both father and son, the son is Michael, were working at this workplace, and the business owner, his name's Leith, I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly, Leith had no idea that he was that Michael was in danger. But now he at the end of the case, he got fined $120,000, which you would know is an extremely high fine for an individual. Yep. And the company got fined $1.3 million. And what's also interesting, which doesn't feature in the headlines, is that the business owner was also ordered to complete 2 years of unpaid community work.
Wow.
Which is a significant thing. There'd be
well, you're trying to run a business too.
That's a lot of time.
It's extraordinary, isn't it?
And as we both know, and of course Sarah knows, that with these type of offences, they take an eternity run through and enormous legal cost. This offence occurred in 2021, and it's only just now finished in 2024. Now, what I find really interesting about the case, and there's these aspects of the person who's been convicted never appreciated that, Leith never appreciated that Michael might die. It was never in his mind. He would never ever intend that. No. And he will live with the consequences of that forevermore. Michael's father worked in the same business And Michael's father, of course, is terribly traumatised, and no doubt there's a range of feelings there. And they were demanding justice. Yet he worked in the same workplace.
Yes.
I just find it a fascinating case, and could be worth a lot more research.
Well, indeed, and this is why I guess my interest in specifically the work health and safety, or the industrial, or the work, just call it work victim impact statement, where that truth telling occurs after the sentence. And because all of these emotions, you just made me flashback to it wasn't one of my cases, it was an electrical safety fatality, but it was on around the time I started for the prosecutors, and it involved a young worker. This particular worker was apprenticed, trained up, and the facts are very short. He died on the job. A very valued employer, a loved employer. It appears it was quite a family sort of business, so everybody knew everybody. So it went through its motions. An investigation commenced, a complaint summons was laid, a guilty plea had been entered. Yeah, and it had gone through the court process. So I only remember that decision, apart from my colleagues talking about it around our file allocation meetings. You know how I remember it? Every year, that employer puts in the bereavement section of the Courier Mail, puts in about how they miss and how much they loved and valued this worker. So that's the employer who was prosecuted who puts this ad in. So it's a huge emotional toll on all the parties, which is what I was getting back to before. These aren't crimes through that ordinary criminological lens. These are really a unique species.
Like unintentional harm is what you're describing. It's just like New South Wales did a study of accident causation and events recently in mining, the regulator.
Yeah.
And they found that more than 75% had unintentional human factors involvement. Right?
Yes.
And I think that's so important to extract that issue of intention matters, doesn't it? And I think that's so graceful. That's quite an exquisite way to honour somebody as tragic as it has been.
It is lovely.
It's an ad. It's taken out. And what's spooky is I don't read the Courier Mail all the time, and I see this ad. So it's a recurring ad. So we're talking now 50. I've probably seen this ad at least 4 or 5 times randomly. So I always know it's around Christmas time. It's around that year. So whether I consciously buy the Courier Mail or not, but my point is, we're somehow drawn into this tragedy, and you just reminded me of that story, and with Michael. So there would have been that anger, and of course I imagine the employer would be angry with, but also behind the company, behind the veil, you've got a human being, the director, who clearly feels affected by the tragedy. It was a workplace related incident, but here we all are, and this they take out the ad every year to honour the memory of that deceased worker.
And Alan speaks frequently about when an event happens that's so severe, so significant, how the CEOs of the companies with whom you work fly out immediately and try and triage.
I've been in cases where CEOs have been on the other side of the globe and they've dropped what they've been doing to come back.
Yeah.
So
on that,
and just on the emotional turmoil. So I'll give you a case out of my past. The round about 1994, I prosecuted an environmental matter against a Malaysian shipping company, and the ship was the Bunga Trajce 2, and it ran onto a coral reef. Now, at the end of that one, at the end of that case, there was a fine imposed. It was $400,000, and at that point in time, so back in 1994, that was the largest fine in Australia. The very first thing to happen after that case, so the next day's newspaper, were people complaining that the fine wasn't big enough. So it's really, I use that example to say it doesn't matter what happens in the courtroom, it's never going to be enough. It will never cure the hurt.
So that's right, because again, it's because currently, for those who are watching, who are following the media with all the victims of crime, the outrage and the sentencing of young offenders for committing, whether it's manslaughter or murder, etc., and the fines around that, I understand the amount of, that community outrage, because you deal with what I sometimes coin or well-established crimes if you follow, Durkheim and sociology, and the dispossessed, the anonymy, which is that notion of, in modern capitalist society, people have or they have to turn to crime, whatever. I understand all of those sociological things, but industrial related, I'll put inverted commas, I shouldn't, crimes, but they are crimes. They're offences capable of attracting a conviction and the recording of conviction. I'm just fascinated in the sociology of those events, because that perpetrator, that offender, that defendant, that criminal did not set out that morning to say, right, what type of intentional harm can I commit? Sadly, things happened, whether they're half of signs falling and severing a person.
The word criminal is a very powerful word.
It's powerful.
Isn't it? Yeah.
It is powerful. Which then brings me to this, Alan and Sarah. Do you believe deterrence, and I'll get you to unpack to our listeners general deterrence and specific deterrence, do you believe deterrence actually works in workplace matters?
Yes, I passionately do.
Wow. You've used the word passionately. First of all, explain to what is deterrence? Well, what do we mean by deterrence in the legal or the courts context?
So there's two types of deterrence. There's deterrence for the individual, and there's deterrence for the broader public. And so in workplace health and safety, you're often talking about industry groups. So we just talked about that case where a $1.3 million fine was imposed. There's probably no need for deterrence of the individual, because the individual business owner has been traumatised, and it's unlikely that the same type of offence would occur again. But for all other businesses that operate forklifts, the logic is that seeing in the media that a $1.3 million fine has been imposed, they might go back into their workshop and say, well, how do we operate our forklifts? Do we need to change the way we're doing our business? Now, the reason why I hold it passionately is that there's lots of great programs out there. All our regulators across Australia have great programs about education and encouraging people to do risk assessments and to find better ways to do work, and great arguments about getting your workers' compensation premiums down. But my experience has been that if you don't have a bit of prosecution going on, then those programs aren't effective. You need to have a little bit, not a lot, a little bit of sting in the tail.
Now, Sarah, do you think deterrence, and I know you work extensively in the mining and various other arenas as well, the message, that broad message, do you think it's a tool, a motivational tool?
I like to think of basement and ceiling. So when you're talking about the sting in the tail, that to me is like when I'm thinking of the basement. Like when things go rock bottom, a motivator to really compel change, to have a risk and compliance team look at something, etc., and advise their executive board is usually stimulated because we know things can go really wrong, and here it has been exemplified and explained in the media because of a big fine, right? That puts a fire burner. But I must say, I'm not into punishment as pure motivation. It goes back to my talk to recognize Loretta Bruning's work, who talks about human motivators, right? Neurobehavioral motivators. How are we going to be excited about things? So I like to design based on opportunities too. I would like to have recognition when I'm doing things well. I want a little win. I want little gains. I want to feel like I belong. So, the complement to some of the penalties is also to inspire and to learn from everybody else about what good looks like and show the value proposition of really good work design. How are you more profitable? How are you more innovative? How do you engage your workers? Showing the upside as much as the bottoms of what the risks are. I want to be, it's like when I was talking about driving, right? All those times I might go past a speed camera, I want credit for the times I have not been speeding to offset some of my speeding moments, should there be one, shall I just say.
That would be a great thing.
I know, I could have like quarter points for the positive, 4 to 1, right? And 1 penalty point, and I want the positives, and that would motivate me really to comply. So same as
I can
workplaces.
give you a real example of that.
Go on.
I love it. As a defence lawyer, most of the time, I love it when the regulator pulls out the workers' compensation records and looks at the performance of the employer and says, they're not hurting many people. We should take that into account in our decision making.
But that's still a lag indicator.
It is a lag indicator.
I want
but
the
it's still
lead
an indicator.
indicators. I want the lead indicators, not just the no harm has been done. I want the mediation of the 3 pillars. I want that. So it's not the workplace protections is that pillar of you shall go home in the same condition in which you arrived, right?
Well, how many times have we been to workplaces, all 3 of us, and you've walked into the workplace and you've gone, oh my God, I shouldn't say oh my God, but oh my goodness, why is no one being hurt here?
Yeah, we're in a Catholic institution right now.
We'll get to the lead. No, but at the moment we're looking at Judgment Day. We're looking at sentencing. So Alan's squarely looking at now the value of the deterrence. So the stick. So lead is the goal. It's the holy grail. You hope
the resilience of an organization, the innovation, the way you engage people, the way you excite people, the way you actually become competitive as a nation.
Yep.
Right. You don't become competitive as a nation by having lots of penalties in place.
No, that's right.
That's my point.
Yeah, so that's the anticipation and hoping that the future is going to be rosy and that another fatality doesn't occur. The reason why I wanted to tease it out was the deterrence. I mean, obviously, I've thought about deterrence a lot. I've researched it a fair bit. I've tried to describe its cogency and its probative worth, its value in court.
You've prosecuted based on this basis. So come on.
But I've seen more so as a defence lawyer than a prosecutor. But as a defence lawyer, I've seen businesses who had a very low budget for safety and very low interest in changing their business practices. So when you're talking about design, they're just not interested. They just keep doing the same thing over and over again. Yeah. And then as little as have an investigator walk onto the premises, or as great as being prosecuted, has an enormous impact.
I know. It's a bit like when you walk through customs and you don't even have an extra bottle of, but you're suddenly worried. You break out into a cold sweat and you think, why am I doing this?
Did I forget the peanuts in my bag?
Yeah, you're constantly worried and you think, hang on, or when a police officer pulls you over for an RBT, you haven't even had a beer. And the thing is, that's right. And so the thing is, but isn't it? It's no different to like RBT, is it? Like you haven't had a drink, but you're worried about what's if the toothpaste that I used or the mouthwash.
Rescue remedy spray that we have, right?
So it is that feeling.
I love getting pulled up by RBT.
No, I hate that. But again, I should love it because I've got nothing to hide, right? And I love watching that. Again, full disclosure, I do like watching the RBT. Do you watch that reality show?
No,
you pull people over for drink and drug testing. It's see, again, I'm getting excited, but I do like that show, especially around dinner time, especially when I'm having a beer. No, the thing is, I should be embracing RBT, right? Why do I freak out like I'm guilty of having 5 beers when I've had 0?
It's an authority figure pulling you over, someone in uniform, and then suddenly like, you're used to being good.
Yeah, so Alan, I understand when the inspector
here's another aspect, and I don't know how you can quantify this, but I've lived through it many a time. You've got CEOs who are extremely busy, who are being pulled in all different directions by demands. You go in to have a meeting with them about some investigation that's happening by one of our state regulators, and they're distracted. Half of them is listening to you, but it's obvious that they're not completely listening to you. Yeah. And then you say those magic words of
prosecution.
I have an obligation to warn you that you could go to jail.
Yeah, or if you show them that article.
Well, it just changes. Quicker than I could snap my fingers, it changes. And all of a sudden you have 100% attention of the CEO, and that's when change occurs.
So let me ask you this. I've had a mate who works in family law say laws were designed for law-abiding citizens. What does that mean to you?
There's a reason why, and I've said this before and I'll say it again here, it's we drive on the left-hand side of the road not because we choose to or we want to, it's because we're mandated to. Otherwise, if we drive on the right-hand side in Australia, things are going to get ugly. So that is the answer to your question, that we are ordered to drive on the left-hand side of the road, not because it makes sense or it's fun, We must.
I think
read into it more than that.
I think the point of the statement is it's law-abiding citizens who comply with the laws.
Correct.
But the same
same
could be said for all those other practices. You know, whether it's designing of workplaces, whether it's education, or whether it's some sort of reward system. All those systems are designed for the person complying with them.
Correct. The people that want to comply.
Yeah.
And so we've got a mate that listened to our first episode, Greg Smith, who's actually doing some work with Viva Health at Work now, special projects. And he is a retired forensic detective, right? So he would be accustomed to having to think about the psyche of the non-law abiding citizen, the people who look for the loopholes and try exquisitely, if you will, to navigate the shadow side of life.
Yeah,
right?
they can get away with it.
Sometimes it might just be crime of passion, as you mentioned earlier, for criminal law. But he's also used to being quite suspicious.
Yeah.
Comes natural to him.
I used to know the numbers, but I think it's something like 80% of the population is the type of person who wants to comply with the law and will always endeavour to do so.
Yeah, some people might want to cut corners, etc. Or with crime, it's pretty low crime rate. The level of deviancy is really low, comparably
Is that
speaking.
just because those are the ones that got caught?
Well, within the
Possible.
20%.
It's possible. But they're never going to tell you, are they? They're not going to tell Greg.
Yeah, there's within the 20%. There's a whole lot of subgroups as well. But there's the people who, if they think there might be a speed trap over the hill, they'll slow down. There's that type of person, and for that type of person,
are you looking at me right there? I saw the eyes; they're all on me, right?
So you mean
I was consciously trying not to look at Trajce because we all know we've gone here many times that he's got this black hot rod.
Yeah, but I'm the brunt of all jokes because I drive so below.
Oh, that drives me crazy.
No, I've been in the car with you.
Oh, that's annoying.
No, he's joking.
That's annoying.
It's Mr. Magoo. It's crazy. I'm not taking the full tweaked potential. Let me just say.
And then there's also this aspect of the assumption that a law covers everyone's cultural acceptance of what should be right or wrong, and I would also challenge that. So we talked about Bill Nash, right? The friend of my parents in the in Adelaide, and some of his criminal background that my parents didn't connect with. They knew him from bridge playing, right? From what I tease my father about nerdy little bridge playing, right? And the effort to comply with workplace law or other aspects, this is a person who did business in an opportunity when sex was selling and before it was too popular to own sex stores, okay? And in that framework, there might be times when things get cross the line and people don't approve of certain activities, etc., in domains. What's lawful or not lawful versus this, moral aspect of right and wrong don't always jive, right?
Yeah,
it changes. Laws change.
I'm not an expert in that area of law, but I can imagine that there's a whole raft of pieces of legislation that you have to comply with, and where there's really difficult moral issues that you've got to grapple with. Because there'll be some legislation, like local government legislation, that requires you to do certain things because the person or people that wrote that legislation had particular moral values that don't.
That's what I'm getting at.
Well, with the business.
Absolutely.
If it's sense making, that's one aspect, but people will often rebel when it doesn't seem to make sense. And you just look at the pandemic, for example.
Well, no, hold on. Before you go off that topic, you have introduced to the listeners on an earlier episode the try before you buy aspect of these stores.
Oh my gosh, you went back to that
you got
one.
The flashback to that one.
The school teacher. Do you remember that?
We were all shocked by that. We were all shocked.
We were shocked,
but in any other industry, you've got try before you buy.
Oh, no. There are some stores, so I'm told, there are some stores that have special rooms to allow you to try before you buy in sex stores.
You're joking.
Not joking. Maybe it's an American thing.
And some things are taboo, and all the general, look at all of life's vicissitudes and just all of the crazy things people get up to. But when you break it down to work health and safety jurisdiction, just
it's pretty prescriptive. It is pretty top-down compliant. The offence rate is thankfully so low. I know this. I've crunched the numbers. When you look at it in terms of offences, it's in the whole universe of wrongdoing, work health and safety transgressions are so low, and that
depends how you define it, of course.
I know. In the criminal justice system, anything that's a prosecution, anything that requires a conviction. I'm not talking about, improvement notices I'm just talking about you have committed a serious matter. I'll include Section 33.
Can I take you off that topic and run a bit further with what Sarah's
negligible.
saying? Let me run a bit further with what Sarah's saying. And we were talking about this earlier today. Luckily, Trajce and I have been in the game long enough that we've got a long history, and if you cast your mind back to the 90s, when there were work health and safety prosecutions, it was all about factories.
Right.
That's what it was really all about. And then that's grown over time, and the industry groups has expanded, and we're now at the point that we're looking at movie making, other recreational activities, car racing.
Yes.
All sorts of things are now coming under the umbrella of work health and safety that previously we would have said, no, that's for the police.
Well, white collar work. White collar work is now suddenly, psychosocial is probably the highest.
It's a big issue. Yeah.
Now, what about on 29th of March 2023, a museum workers' health, safety and risk manager was sentenced in the Brisbane Magistrates Court for breaching Section 32 of the Work Health and Safety Act 2011, having failed to comply with her primary health and safety duty pursuant to the Act, Section 28B. Sorry, so we've talked about this, but let's just do a quick recap. Alan, remind us.
So that was a really interesting case where a person within a museum, she pleaded guilty, so we can now say that she committed an offence by failing to put in place all the safeguards that she should have put in place.
About zoonotic diseases, something to that effect, right?
But if you were to look back, I mean, that's a great example. If you were to look back 10 years, you would. I can't imagine that there'd be a prosecution for the same thing.
And I go back with that sense of empathy, or the empathy map, to say, how much pressure was she under? How many different competing demands did this work health safety officer, manager, have, to decipher and to represent? Because I see work health safety managers with so much put onto their plate, and without a really good cogent design strategy or support in a business, that I guess that's where I'm cautious. Like, I'd love to unpack this again one time.
I'll give you another red hot area right now, which is hospitals don't report all deaths.
Ooh, tell us about
that. And certainly don't report many of them, because they just don't perceive those deaths as being a work health and safety issue. In fact, I don't think they even put their mind at all to whether or not it's a workplace health and safety issue.
Death of whom? Death of whom? Clarify.
The death of the patient.
Right.
Yes.
Okay.
And of course, people die in hospitals.
And hospitals are workplace.
And nursing homes. People die in nursing homes. But that's been, the regulator is pressing in on that area and is now starting, well, as little as 3 years ago. One of our good friends, a former prosecutor who's now retired down the Gold Coast, he was pressing very hard on that topic, saying that a lot of these cases should be reported. Now, they're just not reported now because culturally it's not the sort of thing that happens.
So what's the interest in reporting?
Well, let's go back probably around 10 years ago that I did prosecute a hospital in relation to the fatality of a nonagenarian, a 90-year-old inpatient, only there for 3 days respite. So that hospital pleaded guilty, but that was 10 years ago. It's highly unlikely 20 years ago that matter would have ever seen the day of light, because the previous director would have said, no, that's... I presume this is what he would have said. No, we don't go there, or that's what you don't do. So again, how?
Well, look, I have to. Well, but just use his first names. You're talking about Peter.
No, pre-Peter.
Oh, pre-Peter.
So, back in the day. Right. So the thing is, so again, it's that cultural mindset. But you just reminded me with the zoonotic, we had a wave of Hendra virus prosecutions. I remember that. So we're prosecuting a vet I doubt 20 years ago, we would have even turned our minds to prosecuting a vet, let alone whether the director would have said, oh yeah, go the vet, because he would have said, and I reckon, respectfully, he would have said, what? No way! That poor bloke was trying to do his best.
Yeah.
Stay away from that. But fast forward 20 years, we have managers of museums being prosecuted. So we shouldn't look at the law in a vacuum. It's a sociological...
Well, there
was my point. Thank you about criminal law. Thank you. It's just like saying, that's my point.
Yeah. So I doubt nurses would have been prosecuted 20 years ago. I know for a fact this particular director would have said, no way, you don't prosecute nurses.
Can you tell me, are you suggesting that the prosecutions or the focus for prosecutions when there's a death in hospital or nursing homes is because that maybe staff haven't done their job, or why? Tell me what you're...
No, I don't think you can generalise that much.
Tell me what you're...
But I think, particularly where someone dies, there needs to be a step, a process, where you say, is this something that we have to notify the regulator of? Not every case would require notification of the regulator, but if you don't have a process where you stop and reflect, then you'll end up never notifying.
And there's other aspects about working in a place where death happens all the time, the impact to workers. So when you're doing that system act, there's many points of view. You might think, oh, it's just normalized, people die all the time. Well, you never know what's a trigger for somebody for their psychosocial well-being, having to be either exposed to the cumulative trauma of death upon death upon death, or a single instance where there could be a sense of transference where a person reminded them of their grandparent, for example, or something like that, or a child's death.
What a massive area, and it's an area that's about to explode.
We hope you enjoyed that episode of Why Work. You've been listening to Trajce, Sarah and Alan. And if you'd like to know more about some of the things we've talked about today, please subscribe, and we'd be more than happy to provide you with information, names of cases, and other things that may interest you. Please be aware that none of the matters we've talked about today should be construed as legal advice or any other type of advice. We're just here to talk about all things related to work. See you next time.
Educate your mind, cause the system will keep you blind. Educate your mind, cause the system will keep you blind. Educate your mind, cause the system will keep you blind. Create a new path, don't let the people follow your signs. Educate your mind, cause the system will keep you blind. Educate your mind, cause the system will keep you blind. Educate your mind, cause the system will keep you blind. Create a new path, don't let the people follow your signs. In my lifetime, I followed the wrong...